My name is Melanie, and if you looked at my life from the outside, you'd think I had everything anyone could dream of. My husband, Greg, is a successful lawyer with a spotless reputation. We've been married for 7 years, and everyone around us always said we were the perfect couple. But only I knew how different our reality was from the picture-perfect illusion. The first few years of our marriage truly felt like a fairy tale. Greg was attentive, generous, and always made time for me. We traveled the world, dined at expensive restaurants, and spent long nights talking about our future. But over time, everything changed. Greg became consumed by his career, and his ambitions took center stage in our life. I was left behind, trying to find myself, but instead, I felt like nothing more than the background to his success. One evening, when he was once again late at the office, I sat alone in our kitchen, staring at a cold dinner and swirling a glass of wine in my hand. This wasn't the first time, and for the first time, I asked myself, is this really the life I wanted? Or had I become trapped in a golden cage, too afraid to break free? The next day, I decided to get out of the house and change my surroundings. I stopped by a small cafe, just for a moment of escape. That's when I met Alex. He was the complete opposite of Greg. Easygoing, spontaneous, effortlessly charming. His jokes made me laugh for the first time in months. I found myself going back again and again, drawn to the simple warmth of our conversations. I still didn't understand what exactly pulled me toward him. But then, one afternoon, as he handed me my coffee, his fingers brushed against mine. A small touch, but it sent a shiver down my spine. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Desire. That spark terrified me more than anything. With each passing day, my visits to the cafe became more frequent. I told myself it was just about the coffee and the atmosphere, but deep down I knew that was a lie. Alex had become my escape. His smile, his playful jokes, and the way he genuinely listened to me. They were a breath of fresh air after the stale, suffocating silence of my marriage. One afternoon, as I sat at my usual corner table by the window, Alex walked over with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. "You always come here alone," he said, studying me with quiet curiosity. "Your husband doesn't like coffee?" His question caught me off guard. I forced a small smile, trying to sound casual. "Greg loves coffee, but he's always busy with work," I said, lowering my gaze to my cup. Alex leaned in slightly, his voice warm yet tinged with irony. "Work is important, but it can't replace human connection. Don't you think?" His words hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone saw me, not just the role I played. Our conversations stretched for hours, and every time I left the cafe, I felt conflicted. It was just harmless flirtation, I told myself. But something inside me was changing. A few weeks later, we ran into each other outside the cafe by accident. It was a rainy evening, and I was rushing home when Alex pulled up beside me in his car. "Let me drive you home," he offered, reaching over to unlock the door. I hesitated. "It's just a friendly gesture," he reassured me. "Nothing more." I nodded and got in. Inside the car, conversation flowed effortlessly. Alex talked about his dreams, his passions, and for the first time in years, I felt heard. Understood. When we reached my house, he parked the car but didn't turn off the engine. A brief silence settled between us. His eyes lingered on mine. There was tension in the air, something unspoken. "Melanie," he murmured, his voice lower now. "I know this is wrong, but—" He didn't finish his sentence, because I bolted out of the car before he could. My heart was pounding. I knew I was getting dangerously close to a line I couldn't cross. But a part of me wanted to cross it. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was a mess, my thoughts completely consumed by Alex. I tried to convince myself that it was just an innocent attraction, a fleeting infatuation. But deep inside, I knew the truth. This was more than just flirting. Greg, as usual, was busy. His evening was spent with phone calls and legal documents. We didn't even have dinner together. I wanted to talk, to connect, but every attempt to start a conversation ended with his distant response. "Not now, Melanie." The wall between us had grown too high, and I no longer had the strength to climb over it. That night, I went back to the cafe. I told myself it was just routine, that I needed fresh air. But I knew exactly who I was hoping to see. When Alex spotted me from behind the counter, he smiled, a smile that made me feel as if he had been waiting for me all day. "You came back," he said, setting aside a cup of coffee as he stepped out from behind the bar. I forced a light laugh. "Maybe your coffee really is the best in town." He motioned for me to sit, and we talked for hours, long after the cafe had closed. Then, as if it was the most natural thing in the world, he said, "Let's go for a walk." I didn't refuse. The night air was warm, the quiet streets wrapping us in a sense of intimacy. His voice, his smile, his presence, they all felt like an escape I didn't want to run from anymore. As we walked through the narrow streets, Alex suddenly stopped. His expression was serious now, but his eyes burned with something deeper. "Melanie, I know this is wrong, but I can't ignore what I feel for you," he admitted. My heart froze. His words were everything I had been waiting to hear, but also everything I feared the most. "Alex, we can't." I started, but my voice betrayed my uncertainty. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "You feel it too," he whispered. I had no words. There was still a line between us, one that hadn't yet been crossed. But in that moment, I forgot about everything. Alex leaned in, his lips gently brushing against mine. It was soft, hesitant at first, but then undeniably real. And it shattered whatever doubt I had left. When I got home, Greg was already asleep. I stood in the darkened living room, struggling to comprehend what I had just done. The guilt should have overwhelmed me, but it didn't. Instead, there was a thrill, a breathless feeling that I hadn't felt in years. As I lay in bed beside the man I had once loved more than anything, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. I had taken the first step into the abyss. And now, everything depended on how far I was willing to fall. After that first kiss with Alex, my life split in two. By day, I was Greg's wife, smiling at him when he came home, pretending everything was fine, playing the role of the perfect spouse. By night, I became someone else, a woman counting the hours until she could see Alex again. Every morning, I woke up with guilt pressing down on me. Greg was lying beside me, the man who, just months ago, I had considered the one. But every short conversation, every absent-minded kiss only reminded me how far apart we had drifted. He was buried in his work, spending late nights obsessed with his latest case. And even when he was home, his mind was elsewhere. I knew I should understand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were living in parallel worlds, orbiting each other but never truly connecting. With Alex, everything was different. His gaze, his touch, his very presence filled a void I hadn't even realized existed. We started seeing each other more, meeting during lunch breaks, texting late at night, sneaking in quick moments whenever Greg was too busy to notice. Each time we met, the risks grew greater. Each text, each stolen moment made my heart race faster. But deep down I knew, the closer we got, the harder it would be to stop. This passion wasn't just an escape anymore. It was an addiction. I began crafting excuses for Greg. Late night at work, helping a friend move, grocery store had long lines. At first, he didn't question them. But then, he started asking more direct questions. Why are you going out so often at night? Are you sure everything's okay? I forced a smile, pretended I didn't understand the subtext, and played the role of the overworked wife. But inside, I felt something I hadn't before, fear. What if he was starting to see through me? One evening, Greg came home earlier than usual. I was on the phone with Alex. Hearing the front door open, I immediately hung up, but not fast enough. Greg's eyes narrowed. Who are you talking to? He asked. I forced myself to stay calm. A coworker, I lied. Smoothly, confidently. He didn't press further, but I could see it in his expression. Doubt had taken root. Meanwhile, Alex wanted more. He didn't understand why I was still with Greg if we were so close. Why are you still holding on to him? He asked one night. If you really want this, why not just leave? His persistence stressed me out, but at the same time, I couldn't let him go. I was at a breaking point. On one side, my husband, the man I had built a life with. On the other, a dangerous, intoxicating love that set my soul on fire. I wasn't in control anymore. The situation controlled me. Each day, the tension between my two lives grew stronger. Alex was becoming more persistent. He wanted more time together, dinners, evening walks, even small weekend getaways. At the same time, Greg's interest in my schedule intensified. It was as if he could sense something was off, but he didn't yet have proof. One afternoon, Alex texted me. Meet me at our restaurant at 7 p.m. I have a surprise for you. I hesitated. It was risky, but curiosity, the need for excitement, the craving to feel desired, they all overpowered my caution. I crafted another lie for Greg. We're celebrating my boss's birthday at work. His response was short. Okay, but don't stay out too late. At 7 p.m., I sat at a dimly lit table in our usual small, intimate restaurant. Alex arrived, smiling, with a bouquet of flowers. Tonight is special, he said, ordering wine. Let's make it feel like our first real date. That evening, I forgot about everything. For the first time in a long time, I felt beautiful, desirable, alive. Around 9 p.m., my phone started buzzing. Greg. I ignored it. Then he called again. And again. Panic crept up my spine. Did he know? Why was he calling so insistently? Finally, I answered. His voice was sharp, urgent. I need to see you. Right now. I'm outside your office, but it's dark. Where are you? My stomach dropped. I froze, my mind racing. Greg had never showed up at my office before. Had someone told him something? Was he testing me? I quickly mumbled an excuse to Alex and rushed out of the restaurant, feeling his confused gaze following me. On the taxi ride home, my hands trembled. What did Greg know? Had I been caught? When I arrived, Greg was waiting by the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, a mix of anger and something else, something colder. Where were you? His voice was too calm, and that scared me even more. I had practiced lying so well, but now my voice shook. I told you, I was at a work party. His eyes darkened. I went to your office. It was closed. Your coworkers said there was no party tonight. Silence. My heart pounded against my ribs. He was staring at me, waiting for an answer. I opened my mouth, but the only words that came out were, "You don't understand, it's not what you think." But Greg wasn't listening anymore. Something in his expression broke. The last piece of trust shattered. I knew I was one step away from complete exposure. One more slip, one wrong word, and my double life would crumble. But, to my surprise, Greg didn't explode. He didn't demand the truth. He simply turned away, walked inside, and shut the door in my face. That silence scared me more than if he had screamed at me. I stood there, frozen, feeling the weight of what I had done. Greg knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Lying wouldn't work much longer. But could I really tell the truth? Or should I try to lie my way out one last time? After that tense confrontation with Greg, I had no illusions left. He knew something. But instead of pressing me for answers, he did something unexpected. He said nothing. He acted as if nothing had happened, but there was a new coldness in his eyes. A heavy silence filled our home. Alex felt the shift too. He called, texted, but I avoided responding. For the first time, I started to wonder, if Greg found out the truth, what then? Was I ready for the consequences? And most terrifying of all, did I truly want to be with Alex? Or had he simply been an escape from my failing marriage? One afternoon, Alex showed up at my office. "We need to talk," he said in a low, insistent voice. I hesitated but followed him out into the hallway. "You've been ignoring me. What's going on?" I avoided his gaze. "Everything's getting complicated," I admitted. Alex ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "You told me you weren't happy with him." I thought this was real. My voice was barely a whisper. Maybe I just got lost. Maybe I don't know what I really want. Before I could finish, a colleague stepped into the hallway, forcing us apart. The next day, I came home earlier than usual. I wanted to talk to Greg, maybe explain things. But I wasn't even sure what I wanted to explain. Greg was sitting in the living room, flipping through documents. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Hey," he replied without looking up. I hesitated, trying to find my words. "Greg, can you put that down for a minute? We need to talk." He set the papers aside and looked at me, his expression unreadable. "What exactly do you want to discuss?" His voice was calm, but distant. For a few moments, I couldn't breathe. I finally said it. "I know you suspect something, and maybe I did something wrong. But let's be honest, Greg. We both felt that our marriage hasn't been right for a long time." His cold gaze didn't waver. "So, your solution was to cheat?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I'm not trying to justify myself, I finally managed. "But when you stopped paying attention to me, when I felt invisible, I felt like I was suffocating." Greg was silent for a long time. I saw something flash in his eyes. Anger, hurt, maybe even regret. And then he said something that shook me to my core. "You think you were the only one hurting? You think I didn't notice you pulling away? But instead of trying to fix things, you made a different choice." I couldn't respond. And then he added something else. "You're not the only one who's not perfect, Mel. I've had temptations too. But I chose to try to save our marriage, not destroy it." His words hit me harder than I expected. Did that mean he had chances to cheat too? Had he stayed loyal out of love? Or out of pity for me? And which one was worse? The conversation solved nothing. There was no shouting, no accusations, but also no resolution. We just went our separate ways, to different rooms, to different thoughts, to different worlds. I laid in bed, staring at the ceiling. Was our marriage already over? Were we just waiting for it to fall apart completely? One thing was clear. The real storm hadn't even started yet. The air in the house had become stifling. After my tense conversation with Greg, our home had turned into a battlefield of silent accusations. We moved around each other like strangers. No more small talk. No more forced smiles. And yet, he didn't confront me again. Instead, he watched. And that terrified me more than words ever could. One evening, my phone buzzed. "Alex, we need to talk. It's important." I hesitated. Meeting him again meant complicating things even more. But I knew avoiding him wouldn't solve anything. We agreed to meet in the park, our usual, secluded spot. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting under the old oak tree. He looked restless. As I approached, he stood up immediately. "You've been ignoring my messages. My calls. What's going on?" His voice was tight, edged with something dangerous. I took a deep breath. Greg suspects something. I can't take any more risks. Alex ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. "You told me you were unhappy with him. Are you seriously considering going back?" Something inside me snapped at his words. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I looked away, my voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this, us, was a mistake. The hurt in his eyes made my stomach twist. "A mistake," he repeated, his voice almost breaking. "You think what we have is a mistake." I said nothing, because deep down, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I was standing at a crossroad, to end my marriage completely or to try to salvage what was left. That night, when I got home, Greg was waiting. He sat in the living room, staring at the darkened TV screen. When I walked in, he turned it off with a deliberate click. And then, he gestured for me to sit down. I felt my heart pound violently in my chest. "Melanie," he said, his voice eerily calm, "I'm done playing games. Let's just cut to the truth." My throat went dry. "What do you mean?" Greg leaned forward, his eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them. "I know you've been seeing someone else." My stomach dropped. What are you talking about?" I whispered, my fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "It doesn't matter how I found out," he continued, ignoring my question. "The point is, I know. And now I just need to hear it from you." "Why, Melanie? Why couldn't you just tell me you were unhappy?" I was spinning. Who told him? Did he follow me? Did he see everything? I opened my mouth, but no words came out, because there was nothing left to deny. But then, Greg said something that shook me to my core. "And before you answer, there's something you should know." His cold stare locked onto mine. "I have secrets too." For a long moment, I couldn't process his words. "What do you mean?" Greg leaned back, looking at me like a man who had carried a burden for too long. "I knew you weren't happy for a long time, Melanie," he admitted. "And I had an opportunity, a job in another city, a fresh start. I could have left, but instead I stayed. And I kept it from you." I stared at him, my breath catching in my throat. So all this time, he had also been hiding something? He had also been living a lie? Why would you keep that from me?" I finally asked. His jaw tightened. "Because I wanted to keep things together. I thought, maybe if I just ignored the problem, we could go back to how things were." Greg exhaled sharply, then looked straight at me. "But none of that excuses what you did." Silence stretched between us. A dangerous, suffocating silence. This was the moment that would decide everything. Greg watched me, waiting for an answer, a confession, a final blow. And I still didn't know if I wanted to fight for this marriage, or if I was already too far gone. The storm hadn't destroyed everything yet, but the next words out of my mouth would be the final strike. The tension in the air was suffocating. Greg and I sat across from each other, our gazes locked in an unspoken battle. I could feel the weight of the moment when all our carefully constructed illusions would finally shatter. There was no turning back now. I took a deep breath, my voice shaky but resolute. "Greg, I can't lie anymore." He didn't flinch. "I had an affair." The words hung between us, heavy and irreversible. "I know you suspected it, but you deserve to hear it from me." His jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I was unhappy, Greg. I felt like I was invisible. You were always so focused on work, on control, on everything except me. A flash of pain crossed his face, but it was quickly buried beneath his usual stoicism. "I know I wasn't perfect," he admitted quietly. "I see now that I pushed you away with my obsession for success. But that doesn't excuse what you did." "No," I whispered, my eyes burning with unshed tears. "It doesn't." I told him everything. About Alex, about our meetings, about how he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Greg listened silently, his fingers clenched into fists at his sides. I could tell that, despite all his suspicions, hearing it out loud was a different kind of betrayal. When I finished, he stood up abruptly and turned away, staring out the window. For the longest time, he didn't say a word. Then, finally, "So what happens now?" I froze. Because that was the question I had been terrified to answer. When he finally turned back to me, there was something unexpected in his gaze. "I'm not saying I can forgive you right away," he said. "But maybe if we both want to fix this, we still can." I blinked, caught off guard. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," he exhaled, measuring his words carefully, "that if you choose me, choose us. I'm willing to try. But if you choose him, then we're done." His voice was calm, but there was a finality in it. He wasn't begging. He wasn't threatening. He was giving me a choice. The next day, I sent Alex a message. "I need to see you. One last time." We met at the park, the same place where all our stolen moments had taken place. When he saw me, his expression was hopeful. But as soon as I spoke, it faded. "Greg knows." He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenching. And he wants to try to fix things." A bitter smile curled on his lips. "And what do you want, Melanie?" I hesitated. Because the truth was, I didn't know. With Greg, there was history, stability, and something real that we built together. With Alex, there was passion, excitement, and the thrill of something new. But passion fades. Excitement isn't love. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I could ever fully trust Alex. "I don't know if I can build a real future with you," I admitted. His face hardened. "So you're choosing him?" "I'm choosing to do what's right for me." His laughter was hollow. "And what does that mean?" "It means," I whispered, "that I need to fix what I broke before I chase something I'm not even sure is real." A long silence passed between us. Then, finally, he exhaled. "I get it," he murmured. "But just know, Melanie, once you walk away from me, there's no coming back." I nodded, because I already knew. I barely slept that night. I replayed everything. The good, the bad, the moments where we had lost ourselves. I thought of the way Greg and I used to laugh until we cried, the nights we lay whispering about our future, the love that had once been so strong. And I wondered, could we find it again? Could we rebuild something new from the ashes? And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I didn't know if our marriage could be saved, but I knew one thing. I was finally ready to try. I woke up feeling terribly exhausted, but at the same time, determined. Today, I had to tell both Greg and Alex about my choice. The room was silent. Greg had already left for work, leaving a short note. "We need to talk tonight."
G.
I arranged to meet Alex in the park, where it all began. He looked tense but tried to remain calm. "You've made your decision," he said instead of a greeting. I nodded, feeling my heart tighten. "Alex, everything that happened between us was real. I felt things I hadn't felt in my marriage for a long time. But unfortunately, our relationship started with lies. And I don't want to build a future on the ruins of another life." He sighed, sadness flashing in his eyes. "So, you're going back to him?" "I'm not sure if Greg and I can rebuild our marriage. But I know I don't want to continue this deception. I'm sorry, but I have to go." Alex nodded silently, and we parted ways without another word. I felt as if a string inside me had snapped, the one that had tied me to this forbidden passion. That evening, for the first time in a long time, I prepared dinner, as if trying to restore some of our old traditions. When Greg came home, he looked surprised to see the set table and a candle in the center. We sat across from each other, and I was the first to speak. "I've stopped seeing Alex. I realized we both went too far." He listened carefully, his hands resting motionlessly on the table. "Why did you decide to do that?" he asked, his voice emotionless. "Because I realized we both need to sort out our lives. I know you've also been hiding big things from me. Maybe we both got scared of taking responsibility for our marriage and ran away in different ways. And now," I heard a hint of hope in his voice. "Now, I want to be honest. If you're ready for that too, we can try to start over. But only if we both want to build something new without looking back at past resentments." Greg took my hand. "I've realized I made a lot of mistakes too. If you're willing to give us another chance, I won't refuse." After that conversation, we talked for hours about his job offer to relocate, about my desire to find fulfillment in my career, about our dream of having children one day. The following weeks were filled with honest discussions, arguments, and reconciliations, but for the first time in a long time, we were talking openly. I cut all ties with Alex and focused on rebuilding trust in our marriage. It was a long and difficult process in which we both had to forgive each other and reevaluate our approach to relationships. In the end, I can't say that everything became perfect. Our marriage was still far from a fairy tale, but now it was real, built on acknowledging our mistakes, fears, and hopes. We decided to start anew. Together, we found a new apartment in another city where Greg had been offered a job, and I started looking for work that would bring me satisfaction. Maybe my story won't seem happy to everyone. Some will say that after betrayal, it's impossible to live as before, and they'll be right. We weren't trying to live as before. We were trying to live differently, honestly. Will we have the strength to keep going? I don't know. But for the first time in a long time, I feel that no matter what happens, I've made the right choice. This is a story about how passion can destroy, but also about how, even from the wreckage, something new can be built, if both people are willing to work on themselves and learn to forgive.
Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.